Today on Blue 58, we're going to learn something about the Packers offense, and our guest should know a little bit about that. Why? Because he literally wrote the book on it. Settle in for the most in-depth look at the Packers offense you're going to find anywhere.
Blue 58!
Hello and welcome to another episode of Blue 58, the one and only podcast of thepowersweep.com. I'm your host, John Meerdink. Very happy to be with you here for another episode. Today, I'm very happy to be with you because we're welcoming Bobby Peters to the program. Who's Bobby? Well, Bobby is an absolute madman, and I mean that in the best possible way. He's a football coach, he's a civil engineer, but when I say he's a madman, I mean it as a compliment. Why? Well, Mr. Peters here has written a book called The 2020 Green Bay Packers Complete Offensive Manual, and it is that. It is a complete look at what the Packers did on offense in 2020. And I figure if we're going to be looking ahead to 2021, why not dive into what they've done most recently? In this book, he exhaustively details literally everything the Packers did on offense last year. And I mean literally. It's a great book, but more than that, it's a massive accomplishment, and we're happy to have Bobby with us today to talk about it. So, Bobby, in your own words, what is the Green Bay Packers Complete Offensive Manual?
So when I kind of started doing these, I wanted to put something together that summarized an offense, that walked a person through the various concepts that a team runs, and kind of, in the beginning, I draw them out. So I'll draw out, the concept and the base and the different variations that a team will run with them. And then I also provide some stats with it too, as far as how many third downs did they convert with it? How many, what would they average on first down, second down in the red zone, all that stuff. And then depending on the project too, I'll also sometimes include for run concepts, how effective it was against certain fronts, like different yards per carries against like bear fronts, over fronts, and things of that sort. And then also for pass concepts, I'll put how effective it was against certain coverages, like cover 2, cover 3, etc. And then after that, I'll kind of break down the concept. I'll use diagrams to kind of illustrate points that I make in those sections as well, kind of showing defenders' reactions to certain things. And then I also have sections that, and then I wrap up each section with a why it worked and why it didn't work, to kind of walk the reader through what made it effective for that team during a year, and specifically the Packers in this case, and then what made it not work for the Packers, and what defenses were able to do to slow it down.
So that's the what. The question that's most pressing on my mind is really why. Why do this? I mean, this is a lot of work, and you've done this for more teams than just the Packers, but the Packers alone ran more than 1,000 plays on offense last year. Why exhaustively watch them all?
First and foremost, I really enjoy doing it. It's something that, I've always, ever since I was a kid, in my parents' basement recording games on VHS tapes and, rewatching, college and pro games and stuff, and, taking notes as I watched them. And then, as I got older, obviously, with, digital software and stuff you could download and, watch stuff, especially with, the prevalence of NFL Game Pass coming out, however many years it came out ago, made the NFL coaching tape available. And, I would, when in the off season, because I coach high school ball as well. So in the off season, I would, pick a few offenses to study, and I would do in-depth studies of them, and, to try to learn and grow. And then I would, somebody gave me the idea, hey, you could write books, you could write a book about this. And I was like, you know what, I might dig into that a little bit. So that's kind of how that started. But I think first and foremost, I really enjoy doing it. It's a lot of fun kind of seeing, really getting into the nitty gritty of why things, why a team was successful, why they struggled in certain situations, or, and when you do these kinds of things, you can kind of see, number one, you get a good feel for, a team's playbook, but number two, you see how the playbook changes and evolves and what sections they use each week as you go through a season, right? You can just, some people like to, pull a couple clips here and there and say, oh, I studied somebody's offense, but if you're not watching every single clip and understanding how they game plan and how they call the game, it's hard to get that deep of an understanding of what they're trying to do.
How much time would you say it takes you to do something like this for a team in a given year?
That's a tough question to answer. I try to, each day I'll try to put an hour or two towards, obviously between a full-time job and a family, it's, I can't work on it all day or anything. So I try to put an hour or two to it a day. And then it probably takes, so like the Packers, and I'll start working on, I'll keep up with the film during the season. And then obviously once, I'll start writing the book, in like November, December as well. Like start the sections, start creating an outline. And obviously the tables I can't put in until the season's over. But, the Packers season ended, sometime in late January this year. And then I think I got the book out like mid-March. So, like I said, I can't put an exact number on the exact amount of hours I've probably spent on it, but that's probably, an hour or two a day, once once I start the book writing process. And then, like I said, I try to keep up with the film each week to break it down. So I'm not trying to play catch up at the end of the season.
Obviously a monumental task here. The bottom line question is, what do you learn? How would you describe the Packers offense in 2020?
They were, so I kind of talk about it in the introduction and on the back of the book a little bit. They were really a meat and potatoes offense. They, between the concepts inside zone, outside zone, and duo, that was probably 45% of their offense. And that's pretty unique for an NFL offense, considering a lot of NFL coaches pride themselves on volume and the amount of different concepts they run. So for the Packers to be really good at those concepts, and then I think the cool thing about studying them was how they dressed them up and how they adapted them to each opponent each week. They would, within their, let's say their duo concept, if they were playing a cover two team, they might leave their wide receivers out on big splits to keep the corners, to kind of minimize the amount of traffic inside. But the second they get outnumbered and the defense rolls the safety down into a single high look, the Packers would often use Allen Lazard, their Z receiver, as to kind of take out that strong safety and leave the corner unblocked instead, which often corners are not as good of tacklers as the strong safety. So that's a nice trade-off for the offense. And a lot of times, the ball would bounce outside. Aaron Jones would be one-on-one with a corner, 12 yards down the field. And that's, at the end of the day, if that's the case for the Packers more often than not, they're in good shape and they're moving the ball. So that's just one example of something within that, the duo concept that, they would adapt to certain teams. And, the same could be said for inside zone and outside zone as well. And then, the complementary plays off of it. They were really strong, what I call keeper teams. So like the bootlegs off the outside zone, getting Aaron Rodgers on the edge. They had a lot of really unique ways to do that. A lot of ways to get Robert Tonyan the ball in the flat, quickly. And then that's probably the bulk of it. And then when it comes to the drop back pass game, I don't know if I've ever studied a team that does as good of a job of featuring their number one receiver as Matt LaFleur did with the Packers. They really made Devontae Adams the focus of like the first read in Aaron's progression on almost every drop back pass concept. And that's pretty unique in the NFL because a lot of NFL coaches will say, all right, well, here's the concept. Let's run it, how it's drawn up, but they won't adjust it to, their personnel. But Matt LaFleur did an outstanding job of that and making Adams the first, using concepts that made Adams the first receiver more often than not.
We'll talk about whether or not their approach is a solid one here in a second, but I'm curious, being someone who knows the Packers offense as well as anybody, who's your favorite guy to watch? I mean, they've got a wide selection of different talents on their offense. Who do you like watching?
Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's special. I think in the dragon concept I talk about in that section of the book, dragon is an old West Coast term for the slant flat concept. So the outside receiver will run a 3-step slant, and the inside receiver will run a quick out route directly to the flat. And that concept is a staple in most offenses, across the league, high school, college, NFL. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to work against a single high structure and trying to hit that slant in that window to try to create a big play. And what Aaron Rodgers does with his feet on those concepts is nothing short of spectacular. He's run the concept for so many years that he can manipulate his feet, because usually what defenses will do to stop. So that dragon concept falls under a category called quick game. So it's a catch and throw from gun or a 3-step drop from under center. It's meant to get the ball out fast. And what Aaron Rodgers does so spectacularly is when defenses try to stop these types of concepts, these quick game concepts, by rotating the safeties or rotating corners late after the ball snap, like post snap rotation, because that can really mess up where the ball's going. Because dragon's not great against cover 2 or cover 4, because the defense will have somebody in that hook window, that wide hook window. But what makes Aaron Rodgers so special is he can have the defense can post snap rotate. Rodgers can recognize it and still, without his feet being set, find his check down or find the over the ball route. Who's working one-on-one against a middle linebacker better than most quarterbacks that I've studied, just from his experience within the concept, his understanding. And because of that, Matt LaFleur can call dragon on 1st and 10, 2nd and 10. He's not he's not afraid of the defense. Regardless of what the defense is doing, he's not afraid because he knows Rodgers is gonna find somebody open.
If I can just be a fan here for a second, obviously this is Packers podcast. We talk about Aaron Rodgers a lot, as you might imagine. But the thing about Rodgers last year that I don't think we've seen since probably peak Favre, even early Rodgers was not quite as dialed in the same way I think that he was in 2020. Rodgers is so cerebral as a player, but he somehow combines all of that cerebral approach with not thinking about it at all. And I mean that in a positive way. It's like he lets go and it's like the Force just enters this flow state and it just works magically. And I think you illustrated it from an X's and O's perspective, why it works, because he knows these concepts so well. It's amazing to watch.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think it's an ultimate trust. I think, we saw in the late Mike McCarthy years that the trust was broken at some point, right? It was, whether it's the system, the personnel, or what it didn't look the same. And, Aaron's bought completely into Matt LaFleur's system. And obviously he trusts his personnel enough to a degree where he can make that happen. But yeah, it's all the experience combined with just his supreme confidence in his abilities too. You mix all that stuff together and you get what you get watching him in 2020. I mean, I think the way you summed it up was perfect. It's just playing with instinct and not doubting yourself, trusting yourself. I think that's kind of the theme of why he's able to do what he does.
So we talk a lot about on the podcast, or I emphasize a lot on the podcast, how it is possible, and it does happen in the NFL a lot, that teams get good results with bad process, but that doesn't exonerate the process. And we've talked a little bit about the Packers' process on offense so far, a little bit. You mentioned them running certain concepts a lot more than other teams in the NFL. Basically, I guess what I'm getting at is, what do you think of their approach? Is this the best way that they could be going about things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a sound approach. I think they have enough counters within their offense, especially in the run game. They're so well coached. I think, when you watch their tape, their offensive line is so consistent with, number one, their techniques, but number two, you rarely see guys run through free, like a linebacker unaccounted for or anything of that sort. Or, like we talked about with the strong safety before, you don't have somebody unblocked in the box who's able to make a play at the line of scrimmage just because they're sound with their assignments. And obviously their technique is great too. So I think with that said, I think you can keep the schemes, inside zone, outside zone, and duo. Each one of them kind of complements. They all kind of complement each other. So I think if you dress them up, they use a lot of fake jet motion and a lot of that stuff. And they do run some gap schemes too. They'll run power. They'll run power with a pulling guard as well. So they'll pull people as well. But I think, especially in the run game, I think they're safe there. But, they really, because of the effectiveness of the run game and play action, they didn't need a ton of drop back stuff in 2020. And that's what kind of did them in my opinion, to a degree against Tampa Bay is Tampa Bay, when they in passing situations, would double Adams and force other guys to win one-on-one matchups and force Aaron to hold on to the ball longer. And especially with Bulaga out in that game too, they were able to get home a lot faster too. So I think if there's any place for them to improve, I think it's the drop back pass game and kind of expanding certain parts of that. One thing that Matt LaFleur comes from the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree, and they run a ton of choice concepts where a slot receiver will have a 5-yard option route. And they did run some lookie with Devontae Adams, which is a similar type of concept that I go into great detail in the book. But they didn't run a ton of the staple Shanahan McVay drop back stuff just because they didn't need it. So I think kind of expanding on those aspects of things will make them a better team, going forward if defenses choose to kind of use the Tampa Bay Buccaneer model to try to slow them down.
That was my next question. I want to ask you how the Packers compare specifically to those other Shanahan tree offenses. So you've got the prime example in Kyle Shanahan, but you've also got Sean McVay in Los Angeles. How do they compare? How do they stack up? What's different about what Matt LaFleur is doing versus what they're doing?
I think calling it a dumbed down version isn't really fair to LaFleur and the coaching staff because that kind of demeans it in a way, but it's kind of a meat and potatoes version of what Kyle Shanahan does. It's, Kyle Shanahan, I also wrote a book on the 2019 49ers, and that book was about 350 some odd pages long because they ran every run concept under the sun. That just wasn't the case for the Packers. Like I said, I think almost half of their offense was just 3 different running plays. So from that standpoint, they're a lot simpler, but they're more effective because they're simpler. They don't practice other things, so they get really good at those things. So I think that's a good example of they keep it not as much volume. not as much volume within the system is probably the best way to kind of describe it. And I think that part of the pass game too is heavily influenced by what Aaron Rodgers likes. So I think that part of it has influenced the pass game.
That's certainly true, and that even dates back to Mike McCarthy quite a bit, deep into the McCarthy era. There, I'm not sure how familiar you are with early 20-teens Packers, but circa 2012, their tight end Jermichael Finley had a significant neck injury, and basically for about half a decade, Aaron Rodgers abandoned the middle of the field. Like, he didn't want to throw down the middle anymore because he did, and it resulted in a career-ending injury to Jermichael Finley, and he consciously, it seemed, to avoid throwing down the middle of the field.
Yeah, no, I think, I definitely have watched, my fair share of Packer games. I went to the college in Wisconsin during those years, and then, Wisconsin Platteville, not to get confused with Madison, but I was up in college then, and, a bunch of my buddies are Packers fans. So definitely watched a lot of Packers games, in that time period. But yeah, no, I think that's definitely a fair point that he really focused on the outside. And that's kind of the kind of how that offense was structured as well. It was really just, okay, we got a one-on-one matchup outside. We're going to try to win with a certain route, and kind of go from there. And that was kind of how McCarthy's offense was designed. And it's just, it's a different style of football. And, nowadays, especially with the growing popularity of the McVay and Shanahan systems, is it's more condensed. It's more middle of the field type stuff.
So if you were in charge of the Packers, let's not even say in charge, say you sat down with Matt LaFleur, you get a one-on-one meeting with him, and you say, Matt, I really like your offense. You're maximizing your personnel. You're doing all these things well. But if you could just try this, what would you have them do differently on offense?
I mean, I don't think there's anything specific from that standpoint. Like, not one thing that I would say, hey, if I were you, I would do this different or anything. I think it's just, especially from my standpoint, right? It's like, I don't know, like, obviously from the outside, I'm able to write the book, but I'm not able to, sit in the meetings. Like, what exactly were you trying to do here? Like, why did you approach it this way? So I think there would definitely be a lot of questions I would have to ask, as far as like, the thought process behind stuff, but nothing really jumped out to me as like, okay, they should have did this or they shouldn't have did that. I thought the approach was pretty sound, and I thought they had relatively enough answers within the system to handle stuff. Like I said, I think, adding some different stuff in the drop back pass game might be an area I'd focus on, but what specifically, as far as a specific concept or two, I don't know if I could, say definitively right now.
So over time, we've seen pretty considerable change in the Packers offense. Obviously, you mentioned the end of the McCarthy era was its own specific thing there in 2018, but 2019 was kind of the bridge year, and then 2020, we saw the full version of the Matt LaFleur offense. Where do you think they go next? What do they have to do to continue to innovate? Adding that drop back passing, anything else?
Yeah, that's probably where I'd start. And I think too, and I mean, part of the reason, I think kind of the screen game. They run a ton of bubbles and nows. I don't really call those screens. I could call those like extensions of the run game. But as far as like the slow running back screens, tunnel screens, stuff like that, to like relieve, like where linemen are getting out. I think that's an area, and part of it is they just didn't need to because they were up in so many games and they had such a good run pass balance that, defensive lines weren't teeing off on the pass game. But I think growing that part of the offense as well would serve them well. But I think the biggest component is just the creating. I mean, they didn't have an issue creating open receivers early in the progression for Aaron within the drop back game, but they just didn't need a ton because their run game and play action were so effective. So it's one of those things where it's like, if they needed to, it would be interesting to see what they had in store. But I just feel like they went into a lot of games and didn't need a lot of the concepts just because they were up and some of their base stuff was working so well.
So, Bobby, where can we find you? Where can we find your work? What should we be looking for from you here in the future?
So my Twitter handle is @B_Peters12. I'm like I said, I'm a high school football coach. So this time of year, I don't post as much to Twitter as far as like videos and stuff. All 22 clips with like breakdowns and stuff. But I still try to post a little bit here and there. Definitely, I post a ton more in the off season on there. And then all my breakdown books can be found on Amazon. This past year, I did a Packers, and then I also did John Gruden's offense with the Raiders, which was a lot of fun. I had a ton of fun with that project. John Gruden does a lot of good stuff out there in Las Vegas. So those are my two most recent projects. You can find both on Amazon. The Packers book is the 2020 Green Bay Packers Complete Offensive Manual, and then the 2020 Las Vegas Raiders Complete Offensive Manual as well. I can't remember the other part of your question.
What are we looking for from you in the future? You have any idea what you're going to be looking at in 21?
I've thought about it a little bit. I think I'm gonna definitely, every year I always watch what Kyle Shanahan does in San Francisco. I always break them down. Going back, probably 4 years now. They are, like, in my opinion, they're the gold standard for that system because they do so much. They're always experimenting and trying to find different ways to do things. So I'll always break them down. I'm really intrigued what Mike LaFleur, Matt's brother, is going to do with the Jets. I really liked his approach to the game last weekend in Green Bay against the Packers, and what he tried to do against their defense as far as like the different volume, the different variations of outside zone he was running. Some of the drop back pass concepts he was using too were pretty interesting. And obviously a lot of it's probably 80% of it is a carryover from what Kyle did and what he did in San Francisco with the 49ers. But he's going to have his own twist to it, and I can't. I think that's a team I'm going to keep an eye on as well.
Big thanks to Bobby for joining us on this episode of Blue 58. Appreciate him spending a little bit of time with us. Do him a favor, buy his book. I've got links to it in your show notes here. You can also check him out on Twitter. Search for Bobby Peters. It pretty much gets you there, but there's a link in your show notes here as well. So I've got for you in this episode. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with a look at the New Orleans Saints for Week 1. We made it, folks. We're all the way there. If you enjoyed this episode, appreciate you sharing it, but also reach out to Bobby and tell him what a great job he's doing. We want people like him to continue to do a great job that helps all of us get a little bit more in touch with what the Packers are doing, and ultimately makes all of us, me especially, smarter Packers fans. And as I always say, smarter Packers fans are better Packers fans, and better Packers fans are what we all want to be. I'm your host, John Meerdink. We'll see you next time on Blue 58.